Paula, thank you very much for taking the time
Thanks
to
for having me.
answer the questions that we have on infrastructure. I guess I just want to know, the first thing I was wondering is just as a candidate and as someone who wants to be mayor after October 22nd, where does infrastructure rank for you in terms of all of the priorities that you know have to be dealt with in the next 4 years?
That's a really good question, and I can tell you from my time on council to my time now campaigning and being at people's doors, it is top of mind. It's probably in the top two, I would say, next to improving processes and transparency at City Hall. And, with that though, improving processes and transparency is linked to infrastructure as well, because it's about how we've done some projects over the last 4 years that concerns people. So it ties together very much. As well, when you see close to $100 million fly out the window on mismanaged projects and major capital projects not being managed properly, and they are in fact our infrastructure, people's complaints about roads and potholes and so forth is indicative of the bigger problem. So it's all tied together. Very much, but it's in the top two. Depending on the parts of the city that I've been door knocking, crime and safety is still up there, but that as well ties to infrastructure, because if we can create more opportunities, as in community centers and libraries and programs out of those centers, then you're back at infrastructure. So it's sort of the underpinnings to a lot of things.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and I mean, to touch on that, infrastructure is a very broad category. Right?
It is.
So you have the core streets, roads, sewer, and everything, and then the social infrastructure, which you just referred to with community centers and everything like that.
Well, and the IFC report defines it as all of those plus transit.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very broad category.
Mm-hmm. So if it is a very broad category, I guess within that, what would you prioritize in terms, if you were mayor, in terms of what you would invest in?
Within the IFC report?
No,
or
within
okay.
the broad category of infrastructure. We're talking about core, social. I mean, if we think about all of the infrastructure of the city, where does the priority need to be?
I think that we need to tackle a lot of it simultaneously. We can't just say we're just going to focus on roads. I think that there's a direct link when you have so many more people in their vehicles, particularly from surrounding capital region municipalities, using our roads, for example. If we can get some of those people out of their cars and into a true rapid transit system that's safe, clean, and reliable, and gets them from A to B quickly without them needing their cars, then we've alleviated 40 or 50,000 car routes a day and extended the life of a road maybe even by 5 to 10 years. So I think it's things that have to happen concurrently. We can't just stop community center or library expansion to focus on roads. I think we can do a lot simultaneously.
Sure.
Yeah.
Are there any specific projects, though, that you would target for priority in terms of
specific infrastructure projects?
Yeah.
I would say in the next 4 years, I'd like to see the Waverly Underpass, and I would like to see the extension of Chief Peguis to the west. It's efforts towards completion of the inner ring road system, which is important to moving goods and services, or goods and people. And in my time on council, Councillor Sharma and I had a motion to bump the priority up on that Chief Peguis piece, and that's incredibly important, I think, now as we head into Centre Port becoming more of a hub of activity and the need for it. So, and Waverly Underpass, there's 3 priorities right now that the city has identified at the June council meeting in the southwest quadrant, that being Kenniston widening, Waverly Underpass, and the Clement Parkway extension. And of the 3, I would push the hardest for the Waverly Underpass, only because this railway system would cost us billions to remediate and move. And so an underpass there would be the only answer and would serve the southwest quadrant of the city, probably having the greatest impact without Kenniston being freed up from the courts. I don't know that we'll get that right away to be able to do the Kenniston widening properly.
So the Waverly would be,
that would be a top priority.
That would be top,
yeah,
for sure. Okay. I mean, when we talk about...
Oh, and if I can backtrack,
yeah,
I mean, those are in the Transportation Master Plan as priorities, so it's not something I'm deviating from. I think too often I see at City Hall where we do a study, we do a report, and then it sits. I think we need to tie it all together and pick them up and make them more current and fresh wherever we can. So.
Well, speaking of which, we were talking about the IFC report, and of course that went to council in 2011,
Yeah.
and has been there since. And I guess I'm just wondering, which specific recommendations in there stand out to you as ones that you would be that if you were mayor, you would try to take some concrete steps towards implementing?
There's a lot of good things in here, and I reread it since 2011 for this interview because it was so important. And, maximizing use of financial tools jumped out at me. And one piece that wasn't in here that I announced recently is better use of the local improvement. I guess if you're asking me how would I go about implementing this, I would go back and see if we could again make this document just a little bit more current, or look at what research has been done in each of these areas. So best practices is another one. And I've put forward a motion with Councillor Wyatt in the area of adopting some best practices and tying in our tendering process, for example, with the province better. So having an actual working group so that we're not competing against groups like the province for contract work on roads, because that's driving the price up for what the city's paying. Other areas for action, asking the provincial government for 1%. I've been on council doing that, and our additional share of the PST and the gas tax, and we don't seem to be getting anywhere with that. So I think we need to make greater use in financing more of the investment that we need to move ahead, and the billions of dollars that we need to invest, using P3s more aggressively. I'm a big proponent of doing that. Globe and Mail report on business in August showed Canadian cities using it to fund more of their infrastructure. So with a local improvement that is underutilized, that is driven by the private sector, not community groups, not the area councillor, but is driven by the proponents who can actually make it happen, I think you can do a lot more. You could do neighborhood by neighborhood, 50,000 residents if you need to, replacing pipes, roads, curbs, trees, do the whole thing.
That could be done by the private sector, like on a large scale basis,
Absolutely,
you think?
absolutely, and it works. We see 3 projects in our city. In my time on council, I've been part of 2. They've been on time, on budget. They come back to the city as a brand new asset at the end of 30 years. Why would we not do more? Other cities are going way past us. They're funding their whole rapid transit, rail lines, pipes, you name it, community centers, hospitals. I know hospitals is beyond the city's responsibility, but if you need $400 million to do a proper hospital, or 500, it's there and it's working. So I would take a more aggressive approach with that.
Those are somewhat controversial though sometimes.
A hospital?
No, not a hospital, but a public-private partnership, and they've been controversial in the past. I guess I'm just wondering, if you were to go more in that direction, how would you address some of that, some of the criticisms that often?
I think we've heard a lot of criticism. I think there's room to work with our groups, our labor groups. But I think we're at a crisis point, and I think everybody in this city is recognizing that. And so it's not to replace employees, it's to enhance what employees are doing. So if you take the Charleswood Bridge, for example, that's a P3. The Clement Parkway portion is still maintained by the city. So you have a situation where it works with both groups. So,
what are some other ways? I mean, the infrastructure deficit for the city is so large. What are some other ways that you would consider trying to be able to finance infrastructure renewal in the city? Like what other ways do you think this
well, the
could be
local
done?
improvement is the big one that I'm thinking. I mean, if you think about it, if you had even $100 more of a local improvement to seriously improve a neighborhood, so $100 more on a larger lot, could generate you $12 million if there's an area of about 10,000 homes. So that's your P3 every year for the duration of that, debt servicing.
So that would be the major way.
That would be a big way, yeah, to really get, in those older neighborhoods, when every councillor gets a ward map that shows red, yellow, green streets, Charleswood Tuxedo, very few red, very few yellow. Most of the reds are on regional streets.
Mm-hmm.
When I look at someone like Minarski, every street is red. If we don't tackle this on a neighborhood by neighborhood basis, where numerous water main breaks are occurring, frozen pipes are occurring, the infrastructure is just falling apart, literally.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to tackle it neighborhood by neighborhood like that, I think, because the disparity is so huge.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so that would be, and just to sort of clarify, I guess, how the local improvement process works. So that is something where that just for that particular area, they end up paying more on their property tax bill, just then that goes directly into
Well,
what
it's identified as a local improvement on the bill, so
Mm-hmm.
it falls off when it's paid off.
Mm-hmm.
But 60% of the neighborhood needs to agree to it.
Mm.
And right now what happens, I've seen this happen as a city councillor. You know, people want the change. So let's say they want a paved road from a gravel road, or they want running water where the connection can occur. A department member will come in, will hold an open house, and then people will say, well, how much? And there's so much uncertainty right now.
Mm-hmm.
If we can better pinpoint how much that's actually going to cost residents, so they know, and then they can see it immediately that year,
Mm-hmm.
people feel okay about paying a little bit more or paying their fair share of taxes if they can see it. The way it goes right now is you do a tax increase, you do this frontage levy, this is going into a black hole, and we can't do that anymore.
Mm-hmm. But then what about financing some of the regional streets and some of the other larger infrastructure that everyone uses, or people from a broader area use? How will you finance some of those things?
I would continue with the 1% and 1%. So the 1% that council adopted to do local improvements,
Mm-hmm.
and then subsequent years the regional streets, because that program is working. That's generating a lot of money,
Mm-hmm.
and it's generating a lot of debt servicing as well. So it's working right now, and this has been a very good year for getting more work done.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing, though, I would go back to, because I'm not entirely clear that all the information is being provided. Before the 1% local improvement came in, the department would have a list of streets that they would be doing. So you have list A. Then the 1% came in, and it almost seems to have been imposed. I don't see a whole lot more, and I wonder where list A went now that list B is in the process of happening. So I'd like to see where did all the money go in the department that was doing those?
Mm-hmm.
And I have repeatedly asked for that on council, and I think as a mayor I could get that information. It would seem much easier, because it has to still be there. Some of the other things, though, I think that I have made announcements on that I would undertake immediately. An organizational renewal plan. You have employees coming to work saying, I have 9 years, I have 5 years till I can retire. We need to renew and re-energize our employees so they're coming to work not feeling like they're counting down to the end of their time. We need to be a citizen-focused organization. So when somebody calls 311, they have more information. Their case gets handled from start to finish. And finally, we may need to reorganize our services. And so what I'm seeing as an area councillor, for example, is a contractor will come to do a curb repair or boulevard repair. Maybe that person had frozen pipes and access was needed in the winter. So there might be 3 in a row, and the contractor will come because they've been told, go to these addresses. So they'll do one, and then they'll go a few blocks away, and then a week later they'll come back and do another one, instead of doing the boulevard cuts for all 3. What is the cost to sending people? I know it's a small thing, but the optics of it are ridiculous. There's so not
inefficiency.
coordination. And then the same contractor comes back, follows the same pattern for distributing the soil, and then the sod. So it's 3 steps where they've gone to different addresses instead of working on the same block and going right up and doing all 8 in 2 blocks, say. So
What other sorts of things would you do in terms of improving infrastructure planning? And I mean, that what you're talking about speaks to just doing things in a more efficient manner. But I guess I'm wondering, in terms of being able to do some of that planning on the front end, what are some of the things that you would try to do in order to be able to improve the way that infrastructure is fixed and
So
delivered?
we've been so far talking about more of the deferred maintenance strategy, the smaller pieces. On the bigger side, on the investment side, I think it's important that we have ongoing discussions and consultations with stakeholders. So either a monthly or quarterly meetings with the AMM, the Manitoba Heavy Construction Association, the some of our other partners like CAA, MPI. So when we establish priorities, we aren't just doing it in isolation, that we engage our partners, because they're going to come out and say something about what we've decided afterwards, and they have their own set of data. So why would we not superimpose it and decide the priorities together?
Now, what would that, how would that, like, you meet monthly, quarterly? I guess, is there any other ways that would play out in terms of just being able to improve processes?
Oh, absolutely. I think so. I mean, you're talking about now more coordination.
Yeah, well, just
efforts
you're talking with all these different organizations, and I guess I'm just wondering, I mean, what the outcomes will be of having those meetings more often that will end up leading to better planning and better coordination.
Well, let me give you an example. So Sherbrooke last year, Sherbrooke Street, had pipes replaced. So businesses are interrupted because they can't have people coming by car to park and come to their business. This year, city resurfaced and did the bike lanes. That's 2 years of business interrupted. We're not thinking about what is the user feeling, like what is the client. The clients are the people on the street, and the citizens and the people who pay into that. Better coordination. So if they're going to redo pipes, is there any room within that system to redo the road the year earlier? Can we shuffle around priorities? Can we get more design work done? Because the design work is usually done the year before. So that we have a full slate, we know what we're going to be doing, and we can look at it in 3 years or 5 years, and even in fact award multi-year contracts for some of our projects. So.
Okay. What about with the relationship with the province and the federal government? I mean, as well. I mean, senior levels of government obviously have an important role to play in terms of financing infrastructure. As mayor, what would you do to work with them to, in terms of being able to lead to better infrastructure outcomes for the city?
There's a whole list of things that need ongoing discussion between the mayor and the premier, and need follow-up. And I would request, you can't insist on somebody, but I would request that we have at least monthly meetings on these regular items, and that dialogue be there. I can't see the premier saying, oh yes, we'll give you, your whole 1% that you've been seeking. I can't see it happening. But I can see more negotiation, and maybe some out of that, and in consultation and having these ongoing meetings, maybe there will be some other tool that we discover together that can be utilized more effectively. I think the relationship has been not as good as it could be, and I'd be looking to first start with the premier, but then as well with other levels of government.
Okay. So it could come out of that, just out of that relationship, is be the way that would try to be able to improve how the financing and management of infrastructure occurs.
Yeah.
What about with within the capital region? I mean, obviously Winnipeg is part of this broader area, and there's all these other municipalities around, and their regional infrastructure priorities. What would your approach be in terms of being able to better manage the planning and improvement of infrastructure in the overall capital region? That's
a really good question. And you know what? In most metropolitan cities, the relationships with the neighboring partners are really key. I think that's a underutilized source of leverage, of garnering more for the entire community. And the Capital Region Partners is undertaking a strategic planning process. So infrastructure and all that entails should be part of that whole consultation and discussion. And I know some discussion has gone on with the surrounding communities more. And I think it will be dependent on this next mayor to really drive that. And so many other cities do a really good job of driving that. If you take transit, for example, the development of a transit authority is something that I've put forward a motion on. And that drives the funding and the purchasing of the lands necessary, the acquisition of lands along corridors, connecting those capital regions, because those are the people coming into our city on our roads, adding to the wear and tear. And I touched on that earlier in the interview. So it's about reestablishing some kind of transit, perhaps, or working with those partners. If you look at the city of Selkirk, they have a small bus route they've chosen for the same buses as Winnipeg uses. They're ready to connect. And if we can connect that whole path along Main Street, for example, and you think of all the areas that have grown up. I grew up in the North End, and that used to be all country, and now it's all new development. And if you think of getting even half those people out of their cars off Main, off Henderson, you save the roads and you increase the use of transit. So, it can be done. So these discussions are imperative, and that strategic plan and all that comes with it. And I just use transit and roads, but there's water, there's been issues around water. These can be solved with a little bit more discussion and planning, I think.
Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to add? I think it's pretty much covered everything.
Were these all your questions? Oh, one of the things that I learned in my time on council was how I think we need to give people the skills and the training to do the proper job. We saw a lot of people managing major capital projects with not a lot of training. And I don't know that anything has changed on that. There was a lack of accountability in a lot of the audits. And I think that people need to be held accountable, but they also need to have the tools to do the job properly. So more training. In my time on council, I've seen 2 projects be on time and on budget of capital projects. That's not good. So in most cases, when the auditors reviewed, they said these people should not have been managing projects of city staff. They perhaps were retired police officers or a fire chief, or it's not inherent in their job to be doing. So I think we need to do a better job of that. And as I mentioned before, I think it's time for an organizational renewal in the city, and focus on citizens and how we organize ourselves. So if you have a complicated case, if something has happened that's going to take some time to resolve, you're dealing with one person. Frozen water pipes is a great example, because it happened, people's yards have been messed up and not restored yet and it's fall. I hate to say it, but it could be snow any day. And so people are entitled to that, or to at least have information communicated to them about why it's not being done. So I think that's all
Yeah, I think we've touched on everything, but is there anything else you want to add or want to say about what you would do as mayor around infrastructure?
I think we've covered it all. It's the biggest undertaking. It really is, of all the challenges facing the next mayor. So
Great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, and
Thank
best
you.
of luck, Paula.
Okay.